As we know, the Cincinnati Bengals are an AFC powerhouse team, making 2 AFC Championship appearances and 1 Super Bowl appearance, but sadly, they lost to the Los Angeles Rams in the 2022 Super Bowl. With them having a really young and great quarterback in Joe Burrow, with a reliable target in Jamar Chase, and many other great players around them, these are the foundation of this team for many great years. But in the early to mid 2010s, the Cincinnati Bengals had a very similar situation, not as good or not as rewarding, but they had a very similar situation with a young quarterback in Andy Dalton and a really good, reliable receiver in AJ Green. Although they had many disappointment seasons in the mid and early 2010s, they did click in 2015 where they went 12-4, almost winning the AFC entirely, winning the division, and could have made noise for the future to come. But as we know, none of that happened, and from the years 2016 to 2020, the Cincinnati Bengals will become very stagnant and even the worst team in the NFL at times. So in today's video, we'll be talking about the 2015 Cincinnati Bengals and how they failed. What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, man, 4th and Goal, better known as Rigby. And as we know, in the last video, we talked about the 2013 Kansas City Chiefs and how they are pretty much the biggest collapse in sports history. Starting off so strong, but failing in the big moments like the playoffs and versus the Broncos and things like that. But in today's video, we're going to talk about another similar situation in the 2015 Cincinnati Bengals. Starting off undefeated, and after they had lost one game, it was pretty much a collapse and a down slippery slope for that team for the rest of the season. So with all that being said, let's introduce the team and let's introduce the defense and things like that. So the first player we have to introduce is the most important man of the whole entire team. That is the starting quarterback. Now, I know a lot of you hate Andy Dalton or say he's trash, which nowadays he is, but back then, he was a pretty solid, good quarterback. Now as you can see right here, he had about 3,300 yards. He had 25 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. Now, I think what's also that's important to point out is that he only played 13 games, and when he was absent, they had A.J. McCarron, former Alabama quarterback, and they went 2-1. So this roster is very deep, the fact that they can still win games without their starting quarterback. But moving on to the running backs, I think this is where this is the biggest weak area on this team, and more particularly the offense. They have both Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard. Now, Giovanni Bernard, he's probably the better running back. As you can see, 154 carries, he had 730 yards and 2 touchdowns. But where he was really better is in the receiving game. He had 49 receptions at 472 yards, 1,200 all-purpose yards, and he was really shifty, really fast and things like that. Now, Jeremy Hill, he's like a power back, I guess you could say. I mean, I don't know how to explain him, but a lot of his touchdowns did come from the goal line and things like that, and he had 11 touchdowns, almost 800 yards, still a pretty decent season. But the running back area, again, is the weakest point on the team, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But moving on to the wide receivers and tight ends, having one of the best wide receivers in the NFL at the time, I think we really forget on how good AJ Green was. I think he's overshadowed by Julio Jones and AB. But anyways, he had about 1,300 yards, 10 touchdowns, 65% of balls being caught. And you had Tyler Eifert, really underrated tight end in today's game, but he had 13 touchdowns in 2015, which led all tight ends. So again, you have a really, really great receiver in AJ Green. You have a really solid quarterback and really solid other pieces around the team, like Marvin Jones. You have Giovanni Bernard in the background, in the backfield and other things like that. So moving on to the defense now. So in the trenches, you were led by Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap. Two underrated players in their time. As you can see, both had over 10 sacks. Both was getting to the quarterback. Both was getting to the backfield. And as you look to the right, you can see their defensive rankings throughout the season. Like, really impressive defensive numbers as a unit, man. But moving on to the secondary, again, 2 more underrated guys in Adam Pac-Man Jones and Reggie Nelson. Now, Reggie Nelson, again, never in the spotlight, but he is an interception king. You can see right here, he had 8 interceptions, led the whole league in interceptions that year. Really solid safety in the late 2000s and then in the early 2010s. again, left in the dust, left under the radar, things like that, man. So with all that being said, it's time to actually talk about the season and things like that. So again, they started off 8-0, which pretty good. They played 3 playoff teams in that stretch. They had 3 games with 4 more sacks, and 7 out of 8 of the games they scored 20 or more points. So again, really impressive, man. Like, really not disappointing or getting lucky wins or things like that. Really impressive. And so let's talk about their best games. Now, one of their best games was in week 1 versus the Oakland Raiders. They would beat Oakland, and as you can see right here, Oakland went 3 for 12 on 3rd down, only had 63 rushing yards. Andy Dalton, he really balled out. He had 29 completions off 34 attempts, 269 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And Tyler Eifert, again, he led the tight end category in touchdowns. He had 9 receptions, 104 yards, and 2 touchdowns, man. But that was just week 1. There are other games. Talk about the Chiefs game a couple weeks later, which they had 5 sacks. They gave up 0 touchdowns. They gave up 7 field goals, which that was 21 points. But Andy Dalton, he had a pretty solid game. 321 yards, 1 touchdown. Jeremy Hill, he had 2 touchdowns. But again, a lot of his touchdowns from earlier, they come from like goal line possessions or goal line runs, things like that, man. So let's talk about the downfall, okay? So after a really great win versus the Cleveland Browns and they started off 8-0, the Houston Texans came into town on a Monday night on November 16, 2015. And in that game, the Cincinnati Bengals struggled immensely. Andy Dalton had easily his worst game yet. AJ Green, he did not show up to play, and the offense looked very stagnant and very poor versus one of the worst teams in the NFL. And I think it's really important to note that during this time, the Houston Texans, they were a very, very bad team at this point, borderline the worst team in the NFL. They came into the game 3-5, and although they had a pretty decent win versus the Tennessee Titans going into their bye week and then going into the Bengals game, the one thing that was really consistent with that team was DeAndre Hopkins. Now, a young DeAndre Hopkins was super underrated. Like, bro was a demon, bro was a beast. And in this game, like, he was beasting and feasting, and he scored the only touchdown. And their starting quarterback wasn't even playing. Their quarterback this game was TJ Yates. And although there's no footage and no raw footage of this game that I can show you, I read an article from SB Nation from the time, and they said that Andy Dalton, he really regressed. They relied on screen passes and things like that. And although they had many targets like AJ Green, Tyler Eifert, Marvin Jones, like, Andy Dalton did not look like himself. He threw a terrible pass into double coverage, with which Jonathan Joseph got the interception, and they only went 4 for 14 on 3rd down. They had numerous 3-and-outs, punts, and things like that, and this team did not look like the 8-0 team that started off the season. And so, looking at this graph right here on all their possessions, they had 11 total possessions, which for those possessions there were 3-and-outs. They had 2 turnovers, and then they had 2 field goal points, and then the rest was just god awful possessions where they just could not move the ball at all. And again, this is the team that's supposed to be 8-0, competing for the top spot in the AFC, possibly a Super Bowl run, because you're 8-0. I mean, you're king of the world at this point, but no, the team crumbled, man. And part of it is coaching, part of it could just be they were just ice cold that game. I mean, again, like, this team was nothing too special to be going 16-0, but still losing to a piss poor team like the Texans, But moving on to their second loss, and this is where I think the team really did show its true colors. So remember when I said they didn't have a true running back, that Jeremy Hill, he can only do so much, and Giovanni Bernard, he's a elusive back and things like that. Well, that brings us to the next week, and the Cincinnati Bengals, they traveled to the Arizona Cardinals, a hot team in the NFC at the time, a really, really good team. And they lost 34-31, but it was how they lost that really caught my eye. Now again, this team is really good. Andy Dalton has some couple game-winning drives and things like that. But one thing that we got to talk about is Pat Pete. He was out, or he got injured, and he was out for the last possession of the Bengals, and which is really crucial information because he actually had AJ Green locked up this game. Majority of the game, AJ Green and Pat Pete, they matched up, and Pat Pete at this time only gave up 2 catches and like 24 yards versus AJ Green. And so that left the responsibility for Gerard Powers or Bethel to guard AJ Green. And as you can see, this very first play, Andy Dalton is trying to like force it to AJ Green, looking his way. But I think the Cardinals at this point is just trying to double up on AJ Green because their star corner is not out there. So again, they got to look for other targets, and 2nd and 4 a couple plays later, and Andy Dalton is actually going to hit Mr. Marvin Jones on his corner route, get the 1st down and 10, perfect. And a couple plays later on 2nd down and 10, they try to go for the big play, and he does not get it. But the thing is, they get real lucky with this flag because I think Gerard Powers, he was like a holding call or something like that. But 1st down and 10, and this play is the biggest play of the drive. Giovanni Bernard, he shows his shiftiness. He gets the ball open field, get the big 1st down. Now, we're going to pause it right here. Now, we pause it right here because it is very important about the situation. You have 1:48, you're down by 3, you have 2 timeouts, and you're in field goal range. At this point, you should be handing the ball off to your running back to drain some clock, and either A, you can still go for the touchdown, or B, drain the clock out, kick the field goal, and take it into overtime. And do you want to guess what the Bengals do? The first play, they try to throw it to AJ Green in pretty much double coverage, incomplete pass. 2nd down and 10, the Cardinals send out a full blitz. They pick up some yards, but he gets out of bounds. And 3rd down, the biggest play of the game, they do a play action to Giovanni Bernard, and they try to force it up to AJ Green, which he does not come down with the ball. And that gives 4th down. You have 2 timeouts, and the opposing team has a chance. And Carson Palmer used these 58 seconds immensely well. Like, look at these dots, man. No timeout in a no-huddle offense, and he goes pretty much 3 for 3 because I'm not going to count the spike. I mean, look at this corner route, man, to Larry Fitzgerald. Gets out of bounds, can manage the clock now, things like that. And look at this dot, man, to Larry Fitzgerald. Hey, Larry Fitzgerald, man. But, man, look. Getting to the line, gets the line of scrimmage, and at this point, the game's over with because now they're in field goal range, and they get the spike, and I think a play or two later, they get a unsportsmanlike conduct, get even closer, and they lose the game. Classic Bengal fashion, and this is pretty much their season. Now, the thing is, I'm not going to talk about every single last game that they lost or every single last game that they should have lost or whatever, that shoulda, coulda, woulda game. But the thing is, I will talk about is the wild card game in the matchups versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, as we know, the Steelers and the Bengals, they are divisional rivalries, and they have to play each other twice a year. And the first game, the Bengals won 16-10 in Heinz Field. The second game was in Cincinnati. They lost 33-20. In the third game, obviously, they lost. But the thing is, with the 2 games, they did not crack 100 yards, and they had a problem with turnovers. The first game, they had 2 turnovers and 78 rushing yards. And in the second game, they had 64 rushing yards and 3 turnovers. And the last game, 91 rushing yards and 4 turnovers. And the one thing that's really common about this also is that they lost the time of possession battle in every game, especially in the second game. The Bengals had the ball for 24 minutes, and they lost 33-20. Now, at this time, the Steelers were a phenomenal run defensive team, stopping the run, shutting down any and every running back. But in the playoffs, you gotta have a competent running back that can get you these 2nd shorts, 3rd and shorts, 4th and shorts, so you can keep the drive going. The playoffs is a lot slower than the regular season. The playoffs, you want to hold the ball for as long as you can and capitalize off points. And really, this is where I think running backs shine in the playoffs because it's a lot colder. Sometimes there's snow games. And again, the playoffs is all about time of possession. And hey, before all you go in the comment section telling me like, hey, they did not have their starting quarterback, Andy Dalton, in the playoff game, that could be a major factor. No, that is a major factor why they lost, which I'll give it to you. That is true. But what I cannot give the Bengals or give them an excuse is the run blocking game. Now, the run blocking game all season was a bit questionable, and the fact that Jeremy Hill was not all that good and things like that, and they struggle immensely running the ball versus the Steelers. And I get it, they're a really great run defensive team, but you still have to run the ball at times. And Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill did not have good games. Now, Jeremy Hill had 12 for 50 and had a 38-yard run, which is his longest run. And when you take away that 38-yard run, he went 11 for 12, which is essentially 1 yard per carry. And he had one fumble, and he lost a fumble, and so did Giovanni Bernard, and so did AJ McCarron. He actually had 3 fumbles, and he threw an interception. And my personal belief is when you have a really good running back behind you or to the side of you as a young quarterback, that sort of calms your nerves. And we see that all the time where teams run the ball, and then when they start throwing the ball, the quarterback is a lot more calm because it's not all on his shoulders. And probably the best example I can give you, as in today's game, are the Niners, when they have Brock Purdy pretty much having Debo and Christian McCaffrey in the backfield / in the receiving game. I think that really did relieve a lot of pressure off Brock Purdy because he can just dish it off to Christian McCaffrey, Debo Samuel, and let them do the rest. But hey man, that's going to pretty much do it for this video, man. Just another little documentary, or just another team I want to talk about, teams that we forgot about throughout history and recent history, really. And just pretty much I want to talk about the Bengals because I think the Bengals are they have something special down there, and I can't wait for the future for Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and guys like that, man. But I want to take a time machine back to this team. Now, if you like this video, I think you're gonna like the 2013 Kansas City Chiefs video, and I'm out, man. Peace.